Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A guten Moed. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Arena Lights LLC, and it is dedicated in honor and in memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav HaShalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKoyen Katz Olav HaShalom, and Rabbi Yoel HaKoyen Khan Olav HaShalom. It is also in schus and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel HaKoyen and Risha Katz Le'erich Yomim V'Shanim Tevis for many long, healthy years. So we've begun chapter 12, the chapter of the Benoni. This will continue in chapter 13, 14, and on, about the Benoni, and 15. And what is the Benoni? As we discussed at length in the previous class, the Benoni, if you look at the spectrum, with the tzaddik being someone that's completely eliminated the animal soul, just a question of extent. With the Rasha, the animal soul is very active and influencing. The question is to what extent as well. The Benoni, the animal soul, does not have influence over the body, which means the thought, speech, and action of the person are completely controlled by the divine soul. So it's all dedicated to Torah mitzvahs and what God wants. But that doesn't mean there's no animal soul. It just means that the enemy is there, but it's not effective in influencing the person. Furthermore, that's just not just an action and speech and thought, but the personality of the person has gone through a paradigm shift. Matzav nafshi, his very state of his spiritual state. And this is one of the chidushim in Tanya. Just like Rasha and Tzaddik and Rasha, we're not just talking about their actions, that Tzaddik does mitzvahs and the Rasha does averos. We're also talking about their personality. What's their spiritual state of being? What their character like? Like he says, not just Shema Mushal, Shema Toyar. It's a description of the person's status. So it's more than just based on what measuring of their behavior, whether it's thought, speech, or action. So the same thing the Benoni. We're not just talking about his thought, speech, and action, his state of being. And that's where the Alter Rebbe continues and says not just that the three garments of the divine soul are in control, but the very person is one that le'over averu miyamav v'le'yaver le'elam. So it's not just a behavioral thing. His state of being is such that that concept of defying God in thought, speech, and action. We're not talking about that which is not in his control, which we'll learn soon about the animal soul. But to actualize in any way is not possible. And you see examples for this. There are certain things that every person can find that they're just not capable of. There are things we have a desire for, we're capable, but there's the situations we come to a situation where a person is completely, it's not even in the realm of you considering doing something like that. I mean, best examples are things that are really, we see destructive behavior. And sometimes we're shocked, how could someone behave that way? Not because we're perfect human beings, because some things are just mushal, they're just not in our realm, it's not in our domain. That's what by the Benoni, the thought, speech, and action is polluted, if it's something that's not godly. And that explains, as we discussed last week, and just summing up again, what the Alter Rebbe is saying. Because if you say you can't say he means that he never did an Aveda, never will do, because as soon as you say he does one Aveda, then he's no longer a Benoni. Like we said in chapter 14, he says, every person, every moment can be a Benoni. How could you say that? How could you be every moment a Benoni if a person never did a Benoni, so never did an Aveda? So you have to say that we're talking about that as Aveda has reached a level that he's that personality, that this is not something possible. Now, of course, you could say nobody's ever guaranteed. Even Ein Tzadik B'Aretz Sheyasa Teva Lo Yechta. And nobody can be completely. We're not talking about now self-confidence that I say that. But sometimes you know somebody, you know they're absolutely trustworthy in a particular area. And that's where the Benoni has reached. So it's not just that he's controlled himself for a day or a week or a month. The Rasha can be a very good person. And the animal soul only affects him once in a while, but he's not been changed. His personality has an animal soul within it. And that animal soul is active and affecting him in some ways. Question is how often, to what extent. By the Benoni, the animal soul has been rendered, for all practical purposes, not influencing the person. This takes a strong battle, as we're going to learn, because he has to constantly exercise self-control. It's not like it's easy. But bottom line is, he's come to that point. Just to give an example, now someone that's being trained in the military, so you know the early stages of training is difficult. To work yourself in, to develop the right disciplines, the right habits. You wake you up 5 o'clock in the morning. You have to take 200 pounds on your back and climb up a wet mountain. You have to jump over things. I mean, it really puts you through rigorous. Why? Because they want to train you that your instincts should become disciplined. Because this is training period. When the time comes, God forbid, when there's real war, life and death, you don't want to say, oh, the person will freeze up or don't. That's like all training. So you spend most of your life training for that one time that you need to have that discipline. The same thing is in everything. I'm using military because it's an example of what it means to be disciplined. The same thing is in arts, in music. Anything that you're trained to do that's a skill, you'll see how much training is needed. On and on, you repeat and exercises. You want to make it second nature to the person. So someone will say, hey, I'm ready to join the military. Your will could be there, but you have to be trained. You have to work it in, that person becomes, and you see there's a point where they become so disciplined that it doesn't even require effort. Not to say no effort, of course there's effort. Because the person everyone has a certain lazy side to them. So just as an example, the same thing here. The Benoni is a trained individual who's worked hard at a discipline of self-control and self-mastery. So it's not just that he's in actuality not doing something bad. He's a personality that's not capable of doing something of a sin in thought, speech, and action. We'll soon learn about the faculties. And that's an ongoing discipline. And you see this also, you people who trained for a long time, you can marvel at it, how, so to speak, you see that this person is going to be there on time, as a fact. Again, this is not about guarantees, it's just that the personality has been transformed. So, but Matzavi Ka'es, in this situation, he's like someone that never did Aveda and never will do one. He says, he never did one, and what he may have done, how could you say that? So tshuva comes to account for that. Tshuva has the power to transform the past. So in a sense, there are people, for example, when you hire them for a job, one of the things in the interviews is you bring them challenges and say, what would you do in this situation? And people respond. What's the difference between an experienced person and a non-experienced person? An experienced person, you right away see when they're under fire or there's a crisis or there's a doubt, they just know how they have the composure and the presence to know how to deal with it. Someone who's not experienced will get flustered, will make mistakes. This is not just a difference between one person is this way, the one person. One person has experience, has taught them this. And that's what you want. That when there's a situation, you want someone who's been trained, has gone through a paradigm shift. And that's what a Benoni is. But it's all on the level of thought, speech, and action. And that's what we learned. So when there'll be a test, this person was trained, you can rest assured, because the way they've come to a point where they, as if never did something bad and never will do something. But then he goes even further. And he says, V'lo nikra lov shem rasha, afilu shah achas v'reg echad kol yomov. Now that we've established that this isn't just a behavioral thing in thought, speech, and action, but it's a personality thing, so then you could say, no nikra lov shem rasha, we're confident that even for a moment, afilu shah achas, a single second in his life, says afilu shah achas v'reg echad, two expressions. For a moment or a single second of his life, that he can't be called. He can't be identified and categorized as a Rasha. Because his personality has changed. So he's a different type of person. He's now trained to be a Benoni, trained to be a person of self-mastery and self-control. Kol Yomad. Let me get. Lo nikra olav shem rasha afil shem rosha afil sha'achas v'rega echad kol Yomov. Should have added that. He cannot be categorized as a Rasha for even sha'achas 1 hour. You could say also 1 moment, 1 movement, and a single second of all his days of his life. Kol Yomov. And that's why he's not like a Rasha. Because a Rasha, we said earlier in chapter 11, that someone who does even a lenient, a minor transgression, and even if it's infrequent, and even though he has regrets and he does tshuva, but he's still called a Rasha. Especially at that time when he's doing it. Because, not just because he's doing it, because he's capable of doing it. So with a Benoni, if he was capable, then he's still called a Rasha. The fact that he says they can't even call him for 1 second or 1 moment, that tells you that his state has changed. And that's why he's in the category of a Benoni. It's a new category. Okay. What is this adding to us that we don't know from the previous line? What is this piece adding? So it's adding the following. It's adding not just a type of description that he's not capable of doing an Aveda, it's adding that he's now received a new title, the title of a Benoni. And you can't identify him in the category of a Rasha. So that completes the definition of the Benoni as someone who has that type of self-mastery and self-control. So now the Alter Rebbe continues, if that's the case, so why is he not a tzaddik? What distinguishes him from being a tzaddik? So now he explains why that's the case. He says like this. However, Mohuz va'atzmus nefesh alikis. The divine souls, Mohuz va'atzmus is an expression used in Chassidus. Mohus means personality. Atzmus means core. So the divine soul's core, in distinguishing it in contrast to its expression in thought, speech, and action, and even its faculties, relative to the core of the soul is sometimes called the Edison, but here he's talking about the faculties compared to the garments. The garments are expressions, so that's not Mohuz va'atzmus nefesh alikis. So what's Mohuz va'atzmus nefesh alikis? He's saying that in contrast to the thought, speech, and action of the divine soul, the very core of the divine soul, its faculties, and he says clearly, Shein eser b'chinei seha. That's its 10 levels. That's the 10 powers, the 10 faculties that we learned earlier, cognitive and emotional. In that case, loy lehen levadan hamalucha v'mamshola b'irkatana. So no thought, the speech, and action, in the expression, the divine animal soul does not have any power to influence. And it's the divine soul's power that influences the city, the person. But thought, speech, and action. But when you talk about the very faculties, it's not just the divine soul's faculties that dominate. They're not the only ones, forces that direct and dominate the small city, which is the person. So remember, there's being active and there's being influencing. Influencing meaning in actuality. So the animal soul, as we learned, doesn't have that influence. But you can't say that it's not active. Because you have another force. It's just that the majority, or you can say the dominant force, is the divine soul. So they're not the only ones that have the melucha memshala. Melucha memshala is used berotzen. Achuse berotzen kiblu aleim. Memshala is more balkarchach. So both elements, it's not the divine soul has that dominance. Because in the Benoni, you have another voice, the animal soul's voice. It's just that the Benoni has been trained and become to a point that it doesn't allow it to affect his thought, speech, and action. The tzaddik, the divine soul, is the only dominant factor. The animal soul has been completely eliminated and subdued and eliminated and transformed even. But the Benoni, the conflict remains. Every second he has to fight. He's just disciplined himself to the point that he doesn't allow it to affect. The Rasha does affect his thought, speech, and action. But if you talk about the faculties, if you dissect and ask the Benoni, what's going on in your heart? He'll say, well, I have a desire for certain things. I just don't act on it. The soldier we spoke about before, the military person, or anyone else, that doesn't mean they don't have a temptation, they don't have other distractions, they just don't let it affect them because they become so disciplined and trained that what dominates their thoughts, speech and action is only the divine soul. So in this sense, when you really look at the person, the personality, there's another voice. So the Muhuz va'atzmos nefesh alikis is, in comparison to the garments, these faculties are not the only ones in the divine soul that dominate. And we continue. Ki'im. So now he's going to break it down even further. So then what exactly is happening in the Benoni's life? What does it look like? Because now it seems like what's going on here? You're saying the faculties of the divine soul are not the only force. There's also animal soul. So how does this play itself out? So he says like this. Ki'im. But rather, this is what's happening. Except be'itim uzamonim, on particular occasions. Where's the divine soul express itself? On particular occasions. There is a total dominance, but it's only particular occasions. Like when, kamoi b'shas krishma v'tfilah. Such as when a person is, during the time of reading Shema, v'tfilah and prayer. So that has now additional resource that helps the Benoni control. So then, during that time, and he explains why. What's so special during time of davening? And there's a special time in the day when you have the davening. So there's a special energy that flows. Remember, time is energy in Judaism. So shehi shas moichin de gadlus lamayla. Because this is a time of expanded consciousness. Moichin de gadlus literally means mature mind. Moichin de katnus is immature mind. So in human beings, there's a difference between a child and an adult. But in the hamshacha of moichin, there's a state of moichin de katnus when the moichin is flowing in a minimal way, and the moichin is expanded. So shas tefillah, shas krishma, v'tefillah, he says, is a time of moichin de gadlus. Of what? Moichin de gadlus l'mayla. Above. Since what is below corresponds to what is above, it's a time. Just like Shabbos. Something happens above, and that translates that below it's a holy day. So during davening, during this time of Krishma and Tefillah, there's like a channel opens up, like an Eis Rotzen, an opportune time. V'gam lamato, because you have to say also below, because it's not just enough, it should be above. Because if it's just above, that's how does it affect the person. So during this special time, that you have this flow of energy coming from above, so also below, so that's hishasa kesher, that is an opportune time l'chol adam, for every person, because we said, remember, a Benoni is the mid of every person. Every person has the opportune time to what? She'oz mekasher chabad shaloi, to connect his chabad, his intellectual faculties, la Hashem, chochma bina das, to God, la haimik daite, and profoundly meditate, b'gdulas ein seif baruch hu, intimately with das, profoundly, intimately connect and concentrate on the greatness, b'gdulas ein seif baruch hu, on the blessed infinite light of the divine. So that's with the mind. So this is not just happening on its own. There's a power. It's like a moment where you have a moment of grace. A door opens up from above, and that time. So now you're not just dealing with a Benoni middle of the day, just a regular time. There's a special thing happening, because Alter Rebbe is qualifying. He said before that it's not the divine soul is not the only one not the only one dominant, because the animal soul is also. But that doesn't mean that that's exclusive. There are times, like now, we're talking additional strength that gives the person the ability to those channels open up to concentrate with their minds. And what about the heart? So it also affects our emotions. And to arouse and ignite the love, the flaming fire of love, kedish be'esh, like a flaming fire. Where's that? Remember, that is b'chol ha'yimani shebelibay. On the right side, a right chamber of the heart. That's where the divine soul resides emotionally. The divine soul resides in the mind, the reflective mind, but also on the right side of the heart. It also has an emotional component. The animal soul resides on the left side of the heart. So now this special time, this auspicious time, this opportune time, above and below, gives a person an additional power to connect. And he continues. So it arouses also now the flaming fire of his love. Ledofkaboy, to attach himself. B'kiyum ateiru mitzvaseha, through the fulfillment of Torah and its mitzvahs and its commandments. Ma'ava, out of love. Not just behaviorally, out of love. So here we see it's not just machshava dibra ma'aseh by the Benoni, because it's a special moment during time of Krishma and Tefillah, that has the power to connect to the divine, both in the mind and then bring it into the heart, to actual Torah mitzvahs out of love, with ava, with his heart, with the faculty. So you see the divine faculty is also impacting him. The faculties of the divine soul, I should say. Shezeu inyan hamavur b'kriyas shema da'araisa. This is what is included and explained in the mitzvah of reading the Shema, which is midaraisa, the biblical commandment. So Alter Rebbe is now adding a little more detail about the Shas HaKosher. So this midaraisa is Krishma Mamish, but it's blessings that we say before Shema and following Shema, that's midrabanim. That's required by rabbinic law. These blessings are in order to help prepare us to fulfill the mitzvah. So you see here, there's both a combination. It's a Shas HaKosher, Mechin the Galas that's opening up. That's Daraisa, but the Rabbanon also add the element of before and after to help prepare and create the environment, the groundwork, to fulfill this mitzvah of reading the Shema. L'kiyum HaKriya Shema. Commission is bar b'mokam acher. As is explained elsewhere. This will be later in chapter 46 and chapter 49. So the Alter Rebbe now, in elaborate detail, explains what this special period in the day during davening, during Shema and Tefillah, what we're able to accomplish, that's more than just the regular. But here you're having a so-called Asusa de Le'ela, a power from above that's allowing this to all happen. Now all this, once you have this power, what does all this do? For Oz. So now there's an additional element. For Oz, in this situation where you have this special time, this auspicious, this opportune time, for Oz, at that time, Harasha b'chol lasmoli, the evil in the left chamber, in the left side of the heart, kofu fubot l'teiv, is suppressed and subjugated to the good, hamispashtet b'chol ha'yemoni, the good which is spread to the right chamber of the heart. And where is that being affected? That's coming from a chokhmah bina v'das, from the chokhmah bina and das shebemoyach, which is in the mind, hamakusharim b'gedulas ein sof baruch hu, that is bound and focused on the greatness of the infinite divine, as we learned before. So here, you have this whole additional element that is both stimulating, affecting the mind, the emotions, and then it affects ultimately the left side of the heart. So this is more than just the thought, speech, and action of the Benoni. He's gone through the paradigm shift. He's a different type of person. He has now this additional power during Krishma and Tefillah. So in a way, during Krishma and Tefillah, he becomes even more similar to Tzaddik. Just then. Because he still has an animal soul, except it's now been completely suppressed. Not just the thought, speech, and action, also the faculties. Because the faculties are now, what do they consume with? This power is given the mind and the heart and the emotions to be focused on divine understanding and divine emotion, divine love, fiery love. Whereas, as we learn after davening or before davening, you don't have that additional power. And that's what he says now afterwards. But that we're going to learn in the next year, but just briefly. So this is the additional element that happens. So what do we have so far? We have the Benoni is someone that first, his thought, speech, and action is completely only divine soul's expression. The animal soul is active but not influencing. Furthermore, he's as if a person who's never done and never will do an Aveda because he'll never wander off because he's fundamentally changed. And you can't call him a Rasha even 1 second. But the Atzmus Mahus, the core of the divine soul, is not the only thing in control. There's also an animal soul. But by davening, by Shema and davening, an additional force comes in that gives him power that even the faculties have more power. But now he's going to continue. Avol, Acharat Tefillah, after davening, what happens next? And that will continue in the next year. We're going to have a Guten Moed and a Guten Yontif and a continued transcendent and freeing Pesach. This and all the classes can be found at TanyaApplied.com. Be well.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.